Hello, everyone. Welcome to Inside the Americas. Coming up, the Bolivian president in Mexico after resigning in the face of fraud allegations. A new interim president in his place. We'll take a closer look at who's who in the chaotic political scene there. Then the Dreamers rally as the U.S. Supreme Court hears opening arguments on the Trump administration's bid to end the DACA program protecting young, undocumented migrants who came to the U.S. as children. And a look at the 2,000-year-old lake in Chile wiped off the map as a result of climate change. I'm Jeanine Añez. November 2019 will go down as a turning point in Bolivian history, marking the end of Evo Morales' presidency and nearly a decade and a half of socialist rule. He's now flown off to Mexico, and Bolivia's constitutional court has endorsed the deputy speaker of the Senate, who proclaimed herself interim president, filling the power vacuum. Here's our Inside the Americas look at the major players in Bolivia's political chaos.
It was one of the worst crises in the history of Bolivia. Thousands on the street for weeks on end, all with the aim of bringing down the government. How and why? Evo Morales took office as president of Bolivia in 2006. The country's first indigenous leader, he was swept to power as part of South America's so-called pink wave of left-wing governments. And at first, Morales enjoyed strong public support. Bolivia's economy grew steadily, and the government prioritized a reduction in poverty. But 2016 changed how the world and Bolivia viewed Morales. A referendum to end presidential term limits was defeated, but Morales took the issue to the courts and won, allowing him to stand for a controversial fourth term. Critics said it marked the start of the more autocratic era of Morales' rule, culminating in allegations of electoral fraud after he won his final election last month by a 10-point margin. It sparked the wave of mass protests that ended with his resignation on the 10th of November. Morales owes his downfall in part to this man, Luis Fernando Camacho. A lawyer by training, he heads a committee of businessmen and pro-market conservatives. Long involved in right-wing politics, he was once a member of a fascist paramilitary that fought to deny rights to Bolivia's indigenous people.
Bolivia will give hope to the whole of Latin America. Communism is over. We'll have democracy and freedom. We Bolivians will take up the struggle so that Venezuela can refine her dignity too.
For weeks, Morales hunkered down and refused to resign, insisting his fourth term had been won fairly. What changed was the intervention of General William Kalaman, Commander-in-Chief of the Bolivian Armed Forces. When he told Morales that the military no longer had confidence in him, the president knew his time in office was well and truly over. Abandoned by the military, Morales fled to Mexico, leaving a power vacuum in his wake. For the time being, power will rest with Jeanine Añez, who as second vice president of the Senate will oversee fresh elections. In tears, she announced she would prioritize restoring order to the country.
It's just to give the country a little certainty, to put an end to the vandalism, so that there are no more deaths or rapes. I don't think Bolivians deserve this.
So what to make of the past few weeks in Bolivia? Opponents of Morales say it is a victory for democracy and people power, whereas his supporters say their charismatic leader has been ousted by a right-wing coup d'etat facilitated by the police and military. Only history will be able to make the final judgment.
Our number of the week is this one, 700,000. That's for the nearly 700,000 so-called Dreamers in the United States. The Dreamers, of course, are young people who were either brought to the U.S. illegally as children or came with families that overstayed their visas. Many of them hit the streets to protest in front of the U.S. Supreme Court this week. Opening arguments got underway there over the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program, or DACA. President Trump has repeatedly sought to end that program, claiming his predecessor, Barack Obama, exceeded his constitutional powers when he created DACA by executive action. Catherine Viette explains.
Here to stay! Here to stay! Demonstrators gathered outside the U.S. Supreme Court in a show of support for the DACA program. Created by President Barack Obama in 2012, it protects about 700,000 immigrants, known as Dreamers, who were brought to the U.S. illegally as children or came with families that overstayed visas. Now these Dreamers have marched on Washington as opening arguments on their fate are heard at the Supreme Court.
I wanted to let people know that the program is in danger of being fully terminated, and we want to remind them that we are still here and we need a pathway to citizenship, as well as the other 11 million undocumented immigrants that still live in this country and need some sort of protection as well.
Donald Trump, who's made hardline immigration policies a centerpiece of his presidency, ordered an end to the program in 2017. But lower courts have blocked the move as unlawful on the grounds the administration did not adequately explain its rationale for ending the program. Trump initially promised the Dreamers they would be safe with him, but now he's changed his tune.
Many of the people in Dhaka, no longer very young, are far from angels. Some are very tough, hardened criminals. President Obama said he had no legal right to sign order, but would anyway. If Supreme Court remedies with overturn, a deal will be made with Dems for them to stay.
Opinion polls during the past year have found that 2 out of 3 Americans, both Democrats and Republicans, support granting legal status to Dreamers. Protections for DACA recipients remain in effect while the Supreme Court considers its decision, which will likely be in 2020.
This week also saw the first public hearings in the impeachment inquiry into Donald Trump. 2 seasoned diplomats testified on live TV, William Taylor, the chargé d'affaires for Ukraine, and Foreign Service Officer George Kent. They were grilled on whether Trump pressured Ukraine to investigate Democratic presidential contender Joe Biden and his son. That inquiry comes less than a year before the next presidential election, and despite the controversy, Trump's already in full campaign mode. Our colleagues at France 2 caught up with the president at a Republican rally in Kentucky.
They came for the Trump experience, and they weren't disappointed. Donald Trump has his formula down, kicking off proceedings, a patriotic ballad.
And I'm proud to be an American, where at least I know I'm free.
At this rally in Kentucky, an overwhelmingly pro-Trump state in 2016, the audience is almost entirely white. 3 years ago, a majority of white women voted for Donald Trump, and they're out in force in Kentucky. Directly behind the president, Deronda Smith is taking it all in. The food blogger attends as many Trump rallies as she can.
Leaders are great performers. Great performers are great leaders, and people are drawn in by them. You have to be a great performer, but you have to know what you're doing too.
Foreign policy gets little attention, with the notable exception of the assassination of Islamic State group leader Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi.
American Special Forces gave the world's #1 terrorist a one-way ticket to hell.
Trump's delivery style a hit with the room's younger voters.
It was awesome. Oh, it was amazing.
The address lasts an hour and a half. Policy pledges are light on the ground because the biggest thing Trump is selling is himself.
Then he said, no, Trump is an even better president than Ronald Reagan. And now he's got me down as the greatest president in the history of our country, including George Washington and Abraham Lincoln. And America is stronger than ever before.
And the megalomania is working.
He just makes you feel proud to be American. Obama makes you feel sad to be American.
This Kentucky appearance was arranged in support of the state's Republican governor, Matt Bevin, as he sought re-election. The following day, Bevin was out of a job, defeated by his Democratic rival.
Next now to Chile. Sitting less than 100 kilometers from the capital Santiago, the Laguna de Acuelo was once a weekend getaway for families. But in just the past 5 years, the 2,000-year-old lake has been wiped off the map, a victim of climate change. Kemi Nedelek has the details.
This cracked earth is all that's left of what not so long ago was a flourishing lake, which has disappeared in less than 10 years. The Laguna Aculeo was 12 kilometers squared and up to 6 meters deep. But now the pier drops off into empty space, and the skeletons of animals who died of hunger and thirst litter the landscape. This is what the Laguna looked like just a few years ago. Lorena's home once had a stunning view of the lake. It was here that her children used to play.
I'm really sad that the lake is gone, because my children and I did a lot on the lake. When they came back from school, we went swimming or out on the boat. This lake was our life.
The centre of Chile is in the middle of a drought that has lasted 9 years. And things are getting worse. 2019 is the country's biggest drought in 60 years. Another lifeline for the lake was cut off by farmers. This environmental activist is walking through what would have been one of the rivers feeding into the lake.
It's not professional. Just a barrier made of sand and soil to force the water away from the lake and towards the fields.
But it's also farmers that suffer. Many are being forced to leave. The earth isn't just dry, it's turning into desert. This local farmer used to cultivate 10 hectares of watermelon and now can only cultivate 1.
I've lost several million pesos because of the drought. All of us are losing out.
70% of Chileans live in an area impacted by water shortages, and Chile's water supplies are expected to drop further by 30% in the next few years.
We'll leave you now on a lighter note with our picture of the week. This is former White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer on American TV show Dancing with the Stars. You heard that right. But Spicer's spin came to an end this week when he was eliminated from what was his first post-political job. He was voted off after making it through 8 weeks of low scores, frustration, and a series of over-the-top outfits. We'll leave you with that. Thanks so much for watching Inside the Americas. See you again next time for all the news from north to south.